Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on Series 11, Episode 2 of Doctor Who, The Ghost Monument. And just to get it out of the way right away, as I have done in the past, whenever I've discussed episodes of Doctor Who, the modern series, and everything like that, I have taken to jotting down a bunch of notes as I was watching the episode, things that stood out to me and things that I was thinking about while watching that I'm going to reference in this video. Not sort of recount moment by moment everything that happened in the episode, And so let's jump right into it. And the first thing I have written on my note sheet is that I loved the classic Doctor Who inspired opening with the optics and everything like that, very much hearkening back to like the William Hartnell era. It completely, with that as well as the music, it really put me into a classic series Doctor Who sort of framework mentally, watching this episode. And there were aspects of it that were calling up things from the classic series of Doctor Who, going back specifically to the Hartnell era, which I'll talk a bit more about as I go through my list. But I was really impressed with the opening. I loved that opening, again, collage, sort of, almost lava lamp-esque, fading in and out, and sort of mirrored in the middle, much as the original effect in the 1963 debut of Doctor Who was. And so it brought a lot of that stuff back, going back over the classic DVDs and such like that of the Hartnell era. And the next thing I have in my notes is with the opening sequence where the Doctor and Yaz specifically, but both, she and Yaz as well as Graham and Ryan, they are both scooped up by two respective, spaceships, basically. But the sequence that was revolving solely around the Doctor and Yaz, it was so actiony and so impressive to me, the camera work that they put into it. It was very dynamic in how the camera kept panning around, and you had the sort of classic series Star Trek-esque shaking around because they're in space and the ship's engines are breaking down and they're pushing it to the nth degree and they don't know if they're going to survive, if they can make it to the planet of desolation and everything. And I was just really riveted by the constant camera swinging around and knowing where to be. Like, the blocking of that entire scene was magnifique as far as I'm concerned. As a cinephile and everything like that, I was just really impressed because, again, the camera knew where to be when Jodie was going down picking up the floorboards, or when Yaz was going over and holding her hand to a button as she was told by the Doctor, or the pilot of the ship and everything exchanging dialogue with the Doctor, bantering back and forth. The camera was always on point, even though it was constantly in fluid motion, and I was rocked by that. I was riveted by that. I loved the reference early on in the episode to the Venusian Aikido, going back to the Third Doctor, and I think we've had mentions of it, since the Third Doctor era, but most specifically, that's what it brought to mind for me, and it gave me a chuckle. And, it was kind of a la Spock, too, from Star Trek. It's one of a few things that reminded me of Star Trek, not only the bumping and grinding in the spaceship, but, Jodie's putting her, the Doctor's putting her fingers to the guy's neck, and he just freezes there. He's like unable to move, incapable of moving again. Again, it brought a smile to my face. I found myself really feeling for Graham in the opening of this because of that divide that's going on between he and Ryan. He's trying very much to be there for Ryan, console him, be grandfatherly and everything. And Ryan's reluctance, to play part and parcel, along with that. It really brings to the fore that aspect that was left over from The Woman Who Fell to Earth for me, that they would, along this grand adventurous journey through time and space, that they would hopefully grow closer together, that there would be some appreciation born between Ryan and Graham. I mean, it's already there for Graham. It's mostly a learning curve for Ryan himself. And it would be exemplary to me to see Ryan open up to Graham, and I really hope that happens. I hope that's something that comes to the fore. One of my fears is that they already kind of telegraphed the potential for Graham maybe losing his life at some point. And I really strongly hope that isn't the case. And I hope that is not an integral facet to Ryan's opening up to him, to blossoming to him and blooming to him and accepting him for the granddad that he is. I hope it will not take the threat of death or Graham's life being cut short in some way, shape, or form for that to metabolize in the story, in the characterization. I hope it's a bit more organic and it's a bit more a part of this adventure that they're on, that kind of thing. But that really stood out to me when Graham was waking Ryan up and on the boat or whatever it was. And just the discussion between them just before that, where, they were sort of trying to figure out, was this an engine? Was it a battery? And looking at it, the technology, like Ryan's able to sort of scarf out the fact that it is a battery. It's like a solar powered battery and not so much an engine, and it's what powers the vessel. And so, again, we're seeing some of these friends, these companions with genuine smarts. They're able to pick up the slack where, maybe nobody's really sure what's going on. They all, each of these characters, whether it be Yaz with her police background, Ryan with, as we saw later in the episode, which I'll talk more about, his gaming background and things. And Graham's just sort of like, have at it. Let's see what's going on here approach to things. Even though he is somewhat reluctant, Graham is, understandably so, they still have skills and they can still sort of adapt to a scenario. And I like that. I like the idea of them working together, teamwork, as the Doctor basically put forth time and time again in this episode. Next on my list, when they finally get to the planet Desolation, and they're talking about the things like the flesh-eating bacteria in the water and how the water is poison and everything, talking about bringing back, ideas from the classic series, or at least reminding me about aspects from the classic series. I was really heavily reminded of the Web Planet, Hartnell era story, where there were pools of acid on this alien planet. And like those kinds of, they're very minor linkages and they're probably unintentional. But because of the opening music being so classically influenced from the classic series, and, again, putting my mind space into the Hartnell era with certain things, I was heavily reminded of the Web Planet, of those acid pools with how poisonous and you don't want to go anywhere near the water on this planet was. As well as, like, when they get to the sort of compound where all the robots are, and just the race aspect of this, the quest, the journey that they were on to find the ghost monument, which turned out to be the TARDIS. All of those aspects also reminded me of the Keys of Marinus from the Hartnell era. I think those were all within the first season of the series between 1963 and 1964, all of which I have watched on the classic DVDs and such. And so really, these were some of the predominant things I was thinking watching this episode. There were so many aspects to the classic series that came to the fore, and most specifically around the Hartnell era. Next on my list, talking about the whole plot between the pseudo racers, if you will. There was a time when they were discussing how they got sidled up into this and what the stakes were for them. The idea that they were fighting for their families and their families to be free and all that kind of stuff. And, the female of the two talking about how some of her family was on the run, some were in hiding. And I had this sort of grand vision that called back not to classic Doctor Who, but to classic Star Trek with the episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, where I became very fearful that the other leg would drop by the end of this plot, by the end of this episode, and we would find that they fought for naught. It was all for naught, that their families had been slain by whatever their captors were that they were trying to fend against by participating in this grand, solar systems spanning race. I was just really fearful that they were going to be exposed and let down to the fact that, everything they were fighting for was a worthless cause or something like that. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But the ending of the episode did leave a little to be desired, and I'll touch upon that a little more as I go on. But I was heavily reminded of Let That Be Your Last Battlefield because, of course, the adversarial dynamic going on between these two space racers, if you will, and being on that chase and talking about, trying to best, each of themselves, best each other. And there was some aspect, or element, you could say, to that, going back to that classic Star Trek episode that, the theming there just seemed reminiscent to me. Graham's wearing the Hepburn shades all throughout the episode absolutely cracked me up. Like, he's delivering these serious, dramatic lines, the incredulity of their situation, the worry, the like, what the hell is going on here? Are we going to get home? And every time they close in on him and he's wearing those Hepburn shades, it sort of took the piss out of it. A little bit to me. Cracked me up because they're oddly shaped. They're not like mine. Like, they were very much, they looked like Audrey Hepburn sunglasses that you saw on like Breakfast at Tiffany's or something. And so I wrote that down. His wearing the Hepburn shades cracked me up whenever they focused in on him. Another aspect of the episode that I was left in tears, I was laughing so hard, was Ryan's first challenging the Doctor about the sort of laser rifles left behind by, these assassin robots or whatever, and that gaming, background of his coming to the fore and his running out, firing this thing like crazy at these robots and being all, yeah, I took them down, and then they're all resetting. They start shooting back, and he's like screaming high pitch, "Where's the reload? Where's the reload?" It killed me. I was laughing my ever-loving ass off. It slayed me. It was too damn funny. I also loved the Doctor's, much as she, there were references in the first episode of Series 11, The Woman Who Fell to Earth, about only fools carry knives and things like that, trying to downplay, especially for children watching, the use of weapons, that your best weapon is your mind, is your brain, is your smarts, your intelligence. And saying brains beat bullets, I really love that. We've heard that before, especially I think back to the 10th Doctor talking about a library full of books is the biggest arsenal that you could find in all time and space as compared to a room full of guns and weapons and things like that. And the fact that she uses her smarts and she's like, you went down to the ground to pick something up, but you just picked the wrong thing, and the Doctor taps into the assassin robot and emits this EMP explosion that knocks them all out, knocks all the robots out for a loop for a 5-minute circuit so they can get running and everything. And I loved that. I absolutely adored that. That was the Doctor coming to the fore once again in the story. When they finally get into the underground corridors, first of all, corridor running. A classic and modern Doctor Who staple, as well as quarries and things like that. I was really reminded because if you looked at the corridors, they had rounded tops, rounded ceilings, and it immediately brought to mind, again, going back to the Hartnell era, the very first time we see the Daleks' home planet of Skaro. All of the corridors on their planet, all of the doorways and everything have that cylindrical, rounded top to them. And for a series that promises there aren't going to be any Daleks in it, at least the architecture seemed somewhat Dalek influenced in the underground of the planet Desolation. And so I mentioned that because I wrote it down as I thought about it watching the episode. The idea that, this is once again tapping into the stenza. We have a name drop of the stenza again, carrying over from The Woman Who Fell to Earth. And I found this curious because it led me to wonder and speculate, will this be a reoccurring theme all throughout? We're so used to in the modern era of Doctor Who that there will be little name checks and little references. Sometimes if you don't know going in, you might miss them, but eventually you'll see a pattern. And what is it all leading up to? What is it all eventually going to develop into? And so to have the stenza name dropped in this episode after we just witnessed, one first and foremost going up against the Doctor and her crew in the first episode of Series 11, I was wondering, is this going to be a reoccurring thing? Is this character going to come back? Honestly, I don't know, but I also started to think about it because this episode is, sort of, it's running toward the reunification between the Doctor and her TARDIS. Maybe it's just to explain that away, like the TARDIS spirited off, and but here's a name drop of the Stenza in this episode, the Ghost Monument, so they're still loosely related, these events. The TARDIS is landing on the planet Desolation. It still has something to do with the events from the previous episode, in other words. So, I mean, it could go either way, as far as whether or not that's actually a reference to a continuing theme, or the fact that the Stenza will be a reoccurring threat as we, droll on with the series, or a returning threat, a big bad toward the end of it. It remains to be seen. I wrote that I was quite intrigued by the sort of sentient cloth, not so much the cloth itself. If I'm quite frank, one of my first criticisms of the episode was that I found the cloth itself to be a bit corny. It didn't really seem threatening to me at all, and because I'm a big anime fan, it reminded me of kind of the yokai Rolo cloth in the series Gegege no Kitaro, dealing with yokai in the spirit realm, and there is a sentient sort of towel for lack of a better term, sometimes used as a sash called Rolo cloth, and it kind of reminded me of something more kooky like that, not so much menacing or ominous or threatening. But I was very intrigued by what the cloth was saying. When they've surrounded all of our heroes, and they're focusing in on the Doctor and all the fears that go back all through the many lifetimes of the Doctor, and specifically talking about things that were hidden to her, even within her own mind, which of course brought to mind the War Doctor, which was a whole iteration of the Doctor's regeneration cycle that, she had blacked out of her memory. But going further to say things like the timeless child, having been abandoned and all these things, and the Doctor seeming somewhat threatened, somewhat put on the spot about that. Like, this is again tapping into my speculation and my question. Is this going to be something that we delve into as the series goes on? Is this referencing something we have not yet seen before, that is yet to be revealed? Or is it just tapping in on things that we were already familiar with, as we'd seen in like the Rings of Akaten with the 11th Doctor talking to the big alien sort of demon thing that was siphoning life force and memories out of people, existing by the memories of people. The Doctor talked about his grand past and all of the losses he suffered, and all of that hardship, all of those memories for lifetimes, And so I didn't know if it was sort of falling into that line, or if it was actually debuting the first hints and whispers of something that will come at a later time in this modern 11th series. But I just thought that was interesting. The timeless child and having been abandoned. We've seen sort of hints of that, in the past couple of series, like Clara going back into the timeline of the Doctor and being there for him when he was a child, when he was sort of alone, by himself in that sort of, I don't know, barn or shack or whatever it was on Gallifrey, as he had done with her. He had given her words to aspire toward, and words of support and things like that, and she turned those words back on the Doctor as a child. So again, I don't know if these are references to things we have seen already, or if this is, sort of opening the door, putting a foothold in the door of things that will recur or will be up and coming in later stories in Series 11. I have written in my sort of criticisms of the episode, my second criticism after the sentient cloth being kind of goofy and not really menacing, sort of corny to me, was the guy that was running this whole race thing. I thought he gave up way too quickly in the end. Like the two racers, they get up into space and they're like, look, this is going to be a first time ever. We both won. It's not one or the other. And you better honor that kind of thing. I was half expecting the Doctor to be the one to step up and be like, look, we're witnesses. I mean, she says we're witnesses to this. But, I was half expecting the Doctor to sort of become a little bit more assertive and say, you better hold true to this. I mean, they followed your rules and they're both here. So figure it out, work it out, They both won. Split it 50-50. And, but rather the two pilots get up in his face and immediately he's like, all right, fine. He just gives up really quickly. And I just thought, if they had given the episode maybe 2, 3, 5 more minutes, there could have been a little bit more banter back and forth so that it didn't feel like, hey, do this or else. All right. Like just so quick, but it is what it is. That was one of the criticisms that occurred to me during that sequence. And then, of course, we have the grand reveal of the TARDIS, the Ghost Monument itself. I love the design of the TARDIS, both inside and out for this new series. The thing that really struck out to me the most was the crystals, the whole idea of the internal console room being so formatted with these giant crystals and everything, which were very reminiscent to the Doctor's own brand new Sonic that she created. I wondered if there was some sort of linkage there, once again carrying over from The Woman Who Fell to Earth, the idea of the Stenza getting a mention in this episode, linking effectively where the TARDIS landed, where it ended up in this episode on this planet Desolation, having something to do with, having some, characteristics carried over from the previous episode. Well, it seemed almost as though the crystallization matrix within the console room also was somewhat inspired, perhaps, maybe by a linkage, maybe by the telepathy that exists between the Doctor and her TARDIS. For it to format itself like that, I just thought it was really clever and majestic looking. Shades of it were kind of reminding me of the Eighth Doctor's TARDIS from the 1996 TV movie, The Evil Within, especially with like the dark blue palette of colors and all of the clockwork and everything like that. It looks majestic. I really love it. The only thing I'm going to be waiting to see is as they travel through time and space, I'm curious to see if that crystal central piece in the console itself actually rises and goes up and down or something like that, rises and falls, which would be awesome sauce. Or maybe if there's like a light up effect that sort of brings that about within the crystal mechanism. But I'm down for it. I love this iteration of the TARDIS inside and out from what we saw. And so finally rounding us out for this discussion about this episode is my sort of overall criticism, my third official criticism, but my overall criticism of the episode kind of falls down to the portrayal of the Doctor by Jodie Whittaker. I felt like the Doctor was a bit less assertive and commanding, for lack of a better term, in this episode than she was even in the first episode of Series 11, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. And, I could take or leave that. They were very much playing up the aspect of them being a group, a unit, working together, teamwork, a team effort, and things like that, so that all of the companions were able to shine in different moments all throughout, to a point. And like, while I like that to a point, it kind of felt like a mild disservice to the Doctor herself. There have been arguments talking about, well, maybe 3 companions is 1 too many or 2 too many or that kind of thing. And how are they going to parse up the plotting of the episodes, and that'll, bring a lack of focus on the Doctor. And what I will say in sort of devil's advocate to my own criticism about that is that it actually kind of reminded me of the 5th Doctor era, when he had Tegan and Nyssa and Adric in there and everything, and even Turlo and, for a while. That it was kind of like that. Like the Doctor wasn't so much in the forefront, wasn't so much assertive in all, estimations. And so it's neither a good or a bad thing necessarily. It's just for my taste, like watching the episode, the Doctor seemed so out of her element, and it took her so long to sort of put the pieces together and figure out what was going on. And it just felt dialed back a bit more than even, like I say, in The Woman Who Fell to Earth. And I didn't despise it. I didn't hate it. It's just, it seemed apparent to me watching it like, I didn't feel like she was assertive enough. I didn't feel like while they did focus on her a lot, she was just sort of grasping at straws so much through the episode and somewhat lost, you know. And Yaz even kind of makes that point toward the end of the episode, like, you were afraid you weren't going to get us home, weren't you? You know? And the Doctor, you know, plays it off like, no, I knew all along, you know. But you actually saw that the Doctor, when they don't find the TARDIS there, the ghost monument there where it's expected to be at first, she's at a loss, and she's like, we're going to be dead in like 24 hours. And she's almost ready to give up until, you know, there is that hint of hope, the sound of the TARDIS engines emanating, and it's coming within sight, and her being able to, you know, sort of call it home with the sonic. And so it felt more cohesive toward the end again. But I guess it's just a product of the plot, really, arguably, that she was just sort of a fish out of water in her own kind of sort of environment, you know, which was just sort of weird to me. So, you know, it was something I wrote down because it was something that occurred to me. And, you know, all told, I would say probably out of the first 2 episodes of Series 11 thus far, I probably enjoyed The Woman Who Fell to Earth just a bit more because of those few little criticisms that I had, you know, like the guy overseeing the race giving up way too quickly, the sort of goofiness rather than the threatening ominousness of, you know, the sentient cloth or whatever you want to call it. And again, Jodie's just sort of seeming to be a fish out of water, even more so than she was in the first episode. I've seen people talking about The Woman Who Fell to Earth and saying that, you know, we don't really get a full essence of who the Doctor is. And I felt like I got every essence of who the Doctor was by the end of The Woman Who Fell to Earth, you know, Series 11, Episode 1. Here it felt a lot less certain to me, and it makes me wonder if maybe they filmed this episode block ahead of the first actual episode. Like, I don't know if they were filmed back to back or how they were filmed, in what order. But it just felt less cohesive in places to me in this episode. And again, you know, take it or leave it, for better or worse. It's up to you how you gauge that. I can only communicate my own, you know, this one man's opinion, my own opinion. And that's what I thought of it. So otherwise, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of Episode 2 of Series 11 of Doctor Who, The Ghost Monument. If you loved it, hated it, anything in between, as long as you're respectful and not hateful and all that kind of stuff, I'd love to hear from you and you know, communicate back and forth with you in the comments. I'd also like to ask, if you enjoyed this video discussion, would you please have a look at my PayPal contribution link if you'd like to support my work on YouTube to keep me afloat in this time of uncertainty with channel strikes, copyright takedowns, and things like that, demonetizations. It would be a direct line to me, and you have options that you could explore as far as making monthly contributions or a one-time only kind of thing, request content that I might discuss in the future, and all that kind of stuff is open to you. And anything you saw fit to send my way would be 2 thumbs up from me, and greatly appreciated, because it would hopefully keep my longevity on YouTube going. And so yeah, with that, that'll be pretty much it for me in this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.